Warm greetings, Molweni, Makadi, Amzai, and welcome back to the Izuka podcast. After our introductory episode and the one that followed on death and burial rituals, I felt it would be valuable to explore the interconnected themes of grieving and healing more deeply. And so today's episode is based on the findings and research of Agustin Nyowe's work titled Memory Healing Processes and Community Intervention in Grief Work in Africa, focusing on the Luya and Igbo cultures of East and West Africa, respectively. This paper explores the contributions of culture and community in assisting bereaved persons to transcend their loss and grief from an African perspective. Now, while Western approaches to grief often focuses on the individual's emotional response, the African perspective emphasizes the spiritual, systemic, and communal aspect of healing. Now, his work challenges us to reflect on communal nature of grieving and the profound role that cultural traditions play in this process. By the end of this discussion, it will become evident that when we talk about community intervention in Africa, we do not mean the work being done by just the professionals for the benefit of the community, but also the indigenous community's efforts to bring healing. African grief work can be defined as ways invented in traditional communities for the successful healing of the psychological wounds and pain of bereaved persons. It is a healing system grounded in ecology, sound rituals, and ceremonies that facilitate experiential healing, and its target clients are any members of the community burdened by the painful loss of a loved one. So the major goal of African grief work is to prevent the bereaved person's deep sorrow from degenerating into chronic negativity. Its healing emphasis is therefore fundamentally proactive, creative, and elaborative rather than the medical and analytical. So, Nyowe identifies four key memory components in the grieving process, and these memory components include the fact, the behavioral, the event, and the prospective memories. Now, let's explore each of these and how African grief rituals addresses them, right? So the first one is fact memory. Fact memory focuses on answering the fundamental question, what happened? It seeks clarity regarding the facts surrounding the death, and that is whether it really took place, how and why it took place, where, when, and who might be responsible, right? So, where the grieving person's fact memory is not satisfied with the answers received in response to these questions, the result is a certain kind of restlessness and cognitive dissonance. This was the kind of emotional situation that some Rwandans found themselves in when they came back from the tragic horror to count the human cost of the genocide against the Tutsi in 1994. Those who could not accurately account for the whereabouts of some of their missing relatives, so many months and years after the end of the genocide, many people experienced chronic confusion, the searching endlessly for missing loved ones, the inability to find closure was unsettling, distressing, and it ended up prolonging the grieving process. So the rituals of the funeral, such as viewing the body, gathering of the family, the eulogy, the lowering of the body into the grave, or the scattering of the ashes, all that help the person to assimilate the fact of death. And Nyoe argues that certain rituals and processes incorporated in the program of grief work in traditional Africa are specifically designed to prevent this experience of unrest in the bereaved's fact memory. So what we've just gone through was the fact memory. Now, the behavioral memory, on the other hand, is about expectations, right? So, how the bereaved expect to be treated and the cultural roadmap for mourning. So, in African cultures, relatives, neighbors, and friends rally around the grieving person, providing unwavering support and sympathy. Now, this communal participation fulfills the bereaved's need for acknowledgement and guidance, ensuring they never feel isolated or uncertain about the next step in their grieving journey. So, behavioral memory offers them the image of how to proceed, the expected cultural rituals and programs that would be organized for them to facilitate their healing. And healing comes to the bereaved where these expectations are fulfilled. The bereaved are never left in the dark about what is expected of them or what to expect from the community around them. Unlike the fact memory, the event memory is not focused on the question, what happened? It is concerned with why me? It is not disturbed by distortion or rumors. So the bereaved tends to become preoccupied with feeling under special threat, with the recent death acting as a reminder of previous adversities and deaths, right? So in this case, the community effort is to effect healing by dispelling the illusion that the bereaved person is under special threat. So the therapeutic speeches community members apply during this period is intended to convince the bereaved that he or she has not suffered more than anybody else in the world. The clarification shows that what the event memory is concerned with is how people react to life and stresses in difficult circumstances. So event memory is healed when caregivers and community members help the bereaved reframe the meaning of their loss. Now, this helps prevent overgeneralization, such as the belief that after losing a husband and an only child, the bereaved will face endless suffering. So certain processes and rituals in grief work are specifically intended to promote this positive cognitive adaptation in bereaved persons. So performative practices like didactic and evocative speeches, music, and dance promote the healing of the bereaved person's event memory. The prospective memory, which is the third one that we're going to look at, refers to the bereaved's preoccupation with interruptions to family's routines and ongoing projects, such as a family house still under construction, loans, and other outstanding matters which the deceased person had been involved with. So the bereaved members and the bereaved remembers unfinished discussions and plans shared with the deceased, which can compound the loss. Prospective memory relates to the bereaved's preoccupation with the disruption wrought by the death, right? And the loss of dreams for the future. It also relates to the bereaved person's concern with what must be done to give the deceased a decent burial to facilitate his or her rest and happiness in the hereafter, and his or her dignified passage to the land of the ancestors. So, community intervention in Africa promotes healing in the prospective memory of bereaved persons through helping them to give the deceased a decent burial and assisting them to attend to crucial projects left incomplete by the deceased. In this way, the bereaved is enabled to feel less sense of disruption. And the rest of this discussion will now be devoted to examining the specific processes addressing the four components that we just looked at of the bereaved memory system. Let's begin by considering the following story of Anayo. In July 1980, a very painful death occurred in a village in Igboland in Nigeria, West Africa. A 15-year-old boy, Anayo, the only child of a widow, died in a motorcycle accident. Being a learner and yet speeding on the motorcycle, Anayo was unable to locate the brake and unable to stop. He collided with a mosque and his head hitting the wall. He died on the spot. When the news got to Anayo's employer, well, until his death, he was serving as an apprentice in a timber merchandise. So the employer sent word around to a network of his fellow male villagers in the city, informing them of the incident. Each, on hearing the news, reported to Anayo's employer's house. And when they all came, they were sad, but quickly went into a crisis meeting aimed at deciding how to send the distressing news home. They divided themselves in two groups. One group was to stay back and arrange for hospital preservation of the body until after everything had been set for taking it back home to the village and mother. The second group, composed of three villagers, and they were sent to take the news home in advance of the body. They did not go straight to Anayo's mother. Rather, they went to Anayo's uncle, who fortunately was at home when they arrived. They shared the news with him and then planned with him how to go about breaking the news to Anayo's mother, who was on a farm, who was working on a farm. They planned how to bring her home first, since the news could not be announced to her on the farm where she was working. They decided to send somebody she trusted to go and bring her back. This person went with the message that Anayo had just reported home on his way to Ibadan, which is in western Nigeria, and would like to see her before leaving again. So, not suspecting anything in the message, she quickly left her work to follow the messenger. By the time they reached her home, it was already late evening, a time considered conducive to breaking of bad news or for holding serious discussions. When Anayo's mother could not find him at home, as she had expected, she began to be disturbed. And at that vital moment, Anayo's uncle and the three gentlemen from the city poured into the compound as if from nowhere, and Anayo's mother had scarcely finished welcoming them before they requested that she sits down for a while, and Anayo's uncle took up the task of breaking the news to her in the presence of the others. She was told the true story, that Anayo had a motorcycle accident, colliding with the mosque, hitting his head on the wall, and dying on the spot. She was told that his body was already on its way home for the burial. Before she could hear all these details, she had broken down in uncontrollable wailing, attracting the attention of neighbors and people who are passing by, who came and joined her, crying in solidarity. And from that day until some days after the burial, Anayo's family home was understood to be a house of death and wailing. Anayo's story, though deeply tragic, is a poignant illustration of how grief is approached within African communities, particularly in Igbo culture, because that's where the story came from. The profound support of the community, the careful handling of bad news, and the collective mourning are not just customs, but deeply ingrained practices that help the bereaved navigate their overwhelming pain. And as we explore the phases of grief that follow such a loss, we can see how the community plays a crucial role in not only sharing the burden of grief, but also guiding the mourner through a series of rituals that foster emotional healing. Major phases and processes of grief with allowance for variation in specific details. One can say that grief work, such as among the Igbo in Nigeria and the Bukusu in Luya, Kenya, involves helping the bereaved to pass through the standard supportive procedure arising within the community wisdom of the people and handed on from generation to generation. These include breaking the bad news and joining in solidarity to weep with the bereaved, the systemic practices and limited reparenting, promotion of logical thinking and double description, and positive cognitive adaptation, behavioral pattern breaking. So, finishing a task began by the deceased and leave taking ceremonies. And the last one is rehabilitation and reconciliation. The first one, breaking bad news and crying with the bereaved. This is one of the basic components of grief work. The whole process begins with an effort to break the news about the death at an appropriate time and setting. So the home of the bereaved, if he or she was away when the death occurred, is considered the appropriate setting, and the market, the farm, or the hallway, or somewhere along the road are considered inappropriate settings. Traditional wisdom considers that such bad news requires a calm ambiance for it to be properly told and assimilated. Similarly, early morning and late evening are considered appropriate hours for assimilating of such stressful information because they constitute the liminal periods of the day between rest and work, and when majority of neighbors and friends will not have gone out in pursuit of their daily business, or they would have come back home. It is considered beneficial that neighbors and friends be in their homes when the news is broken, since the bereaved's weeping or receiving such news needs the emotional support of familiar people. And which is an important healing component of this stage, is definitely the presence of an intervening witnessing community. So fellow villagers, neighbors and friends, they cry with the bereaved in joint protest against the loss. And their supportive crying at this period carries an enormous power, and it validates for the bereaved the relevance of tears. And this was the pattern that took place when Anayo's death was announced to his mother. The care, physical presence and maturity of community in the case of Anayo's death, 3 elders officiated in the process, added credibility to the news and addressed the needs of her fact memory. The community's presence and crying in solidarity with her further addressed the needs of her behavioral memory. So their actions matched her expectations of support at such a difficult moment in her life. And she derived healing from being guided and protected by their supportive shoulders. And in addition, the shared crying confirmed her belief that weeping about the death is part of the essential process of mourning. And in this way, the community supplied her behavioral memory with the objective cues for grieving, appropriate at this period, removing ambiguity and facilitating healing. Systemic practice and limited reparenting. So this tends to be the second stage, right? And at this second stage, a different orientation is involved. Crying in solidarity is suspended, and attention is directed to how the community can help the bereaved to get back the energy expended at the previous stage, right? So the impact of the loss on the bereaved ability to function is one of the basic considerations. In the case of Anayo's mother, extended family members, neighbors, friends, age mates, and other members of the larger local community volunteered to take over the responsibilities of cleaning the home and compound, in preparing it for the guests who came from far and near to express their condolences. So they will do whatever chores needs to be done. So whether it be fetching water for the home, even the burial and funeral arrangements were taken over by these volunteers, because obviously at this point Anayo's mother was encouraged to sit and receive visitors. Relatives and other close friends of hers also prepared her food. The attention and supportive care she got at this period is equivalent to that made available to a hospital patient by relatives and friends. So it follows from the conviction of traditional African culture that a person in a painful state of bereavement is usually weak, confused, destabilized, unfocused, and incapable of attending to day-to-day responsibilities. So it basically allows her to rest, and they assume will promote her health and resilience. A number of healing practices that the volunteers undertake at this stage on behalf of the bereaved are also worth mentioning, because they reach out to other members of the family. So she doesn't have to keep tab of, oh, have I told this one? Have I told so and so? So those volunteers also take on that responsibility. In cases where children are bereaved, their needs are attended to, not by their mourning mother or father, but by the relatives and friends. So in addition, the volunteers take on the task of feeding the family, goats or animals if they have any, basically tending to the homestead, right? And whatever other concerns that needs to be attended to. So when Anayo died, friends, relatives, and neighboring women offered to sleep at his mother's house for some days. Some of the most closely related slept there for weeks. They did this to encourage her to sleep through their own example. So thus grief work helps to attend both to the intrapsychic and the interpersonal needs of the bereaved person. Her behavioral memory, which was attended to at the previous stage, continues to be served at the second stage too. The various supportive intrapsychic and interpersonal interventions made available to her by volunteers match her expectations of continued supportive care from her relatives and friends. Her prospective memory is held by the volunteers' thoughtful care of her homestead and other family concerns, which she cannot supervise because she is engaged in complying with mourning rituals. And a positive cognitive adaptation. In traditional culture, it is assumed that the way a mourner experiences a death depends on how she or he interprets the loss, right? So it's its personal meaning. And for this reason, the intervention process at this third stage attempts to challenge the negative meaning the bereaved makes. For example, Anayu's mother predictions regarding her life prospects now that her son has died. During funeral ceremonies, people make emotionally sustaining speeches aimed at promoting multiple description of the meaning of the loss. The effect is to uplift the bereaved self-image and prospective memory. Speeches include stories and parables intended to teach the bereaved a new way of looking at the loss. So most of the speeches made to Anayo's mother at this stage were aimed at helping her to make a downward comparison, to help her to realize that others were less fortunate than her. A judgment that we are better off than others is sometimes a way of coping with adversity. Positive comparison can sometimes change the personal meaning of a situation enough to mitigate some of the distress. The therapeutic impact of these speeches, some of which focus on the bereaved person's memory of the dead, in which opportunities to talk about the deceased with others who knew and loved him or her, are crucial in resolving grief. So these speeches create a fuller biography of the deceased life, emphasizing the importance of shared conversations with loved ones in transforming the relationship with the deceased into a continuing and positive internal dialogue, right? The compassionate friends show that those rituals that promote opportunities for exchanging stories and recollections about the life of the deceased help to transform the nature of the relationship from one centering on the actual physical interaction to one based on internal representation. So, in addition, it might also be considered therapeutic that memories are edited, rearranged, and repositioned in order for the bereaved person to make sense of life without the deceased physical presence. So, two memory systems, event and prospective, were served when the speeches and the condolences helped to impress upon Anayo's mother that all was not lost in her life when Anayo died. Other people's presence and contribution were designed to promote in her the sustaining belief that despite Anayo's death, she could still go on, trusting herself to reinvest in the dedicated assistance of friends. And in the bereaved is an essential component of the healing process. In some places, the parting ritual of cutting the bereaved's hair takes place on the 12th day following the burial. In some, an ordinary close cut of the hair is considered sufficient. In others, such as among the Bukusu, the Luya, the bereaved's hair is completely shaved. The hair is thrown away into the natural refuse disposal area of the village, and such as the gullies from where it is reasoned that it will be washed away forever to an unknown destination during the rainy season. And this indicates permanent severing of the bonds with the deceased, right? So the hair removed is the hair the bereaved had at the time the death took place. So for widows and widowers, this is a very important transition in their adjustment. It helps them to negotiate the process of rebuilding and reinvesting in other people without guilt about betraying the former bond with the deceased partner. It is thus a ritual that signifies for the bereaved the exit of the old order and opening of space for the inauguration of a new one, right? So the other thing that's done is the bereaved ritual birth. In many places, this is a gender specific process. Only widows are considered in need of the ritual birth. On the appropriate day, which is usually the 12th day after the burial, she's accompanied to the village stream in the early hours of the morning, and the ritual includes leaving behind and eventually throwing away, obviously after the bath, the dress or wrapper she had been wearing all through the period of her grief up to this time. And she exchanges this for an official mourning dress, which she is expected to wear from that day until the full mourning period is over. Now, this ritual, like the one previously outlined, signifies the community's effort to neutralize in the bereaved's mind the space previously occupied by the deceased. And during the ritual of throwing away the old dress, the bereaved is instructed to make certain verbal ritual pronouncements to the deceased to the effect that the original bonding has been broken and that from now onwards the two of them are no longer one. And this is a way of instilling in the bereaved the formal recognition of the end of the old order, and sort of giving them permission to start a new life, right? The bereaved takes off official mourning dress at the expiration of the approved period. The length of this period differs from community to community. In some places, between 6 months and 2 years. The bereaved burns or throws away the mourning dress. Here, as the dresses, usually a pair is involved, are removed and burned, and they are immediately replaced with new clothes that are intended to symbolize the bereaved, the formal end of her mourning, right? And this ritual of reclothing also concretizes for the bereaved the fact that he or she is permitted to re-enter the full social life of the community. And this gives her or him permission to remarry if she wants, and in the case of a widow, to become pregnant. So African Christians these days usually celebrate this official end of their grief journey by requesting friends and relations to accompany them to a Thanksgiving church service conducted on their behalf on the day. And I argued that the elaborate processes involved in these rituals heal by addressing the behavioral memory of the bereaved, and through them the bereaved experiences the relief of knowing that he or she has followed the mourning protocol socially approved by the community. And bereaved individuals feel satisfied that they have been able to do all that was required to honor the deceased by socially appropriate mourning before struggling to reinvest in people around them and to forge ahead with life, right? So the healing effected at this stage also positively affects the bereaved prospective memory. And with the ritual of parting fully conducted, they feel empowered to go on with life without any fear that they might incur a curse or other punishment as a result of the deceased grudge arising from some disservice or disrespect shown during the mourning period, right? So these performative parting rituals vary in their specific practices across different parts of Africa. But such variations in the details does not detract from the common therapeutic goal of these experiences to promote behavioral pattern breaking between the bereaved and the deceased, right? In all accounts, the psychological relief that is expected and experienced is the same. The bereaved is now free to re-establish his or her life in the absence of the dead without experiencing feelings of guilt or disloyalty. Now we are going to look at the last one, rehabilitation and reconciliation. Rehabilitation and reconciliation is not a universal part of grief work in Africa. When the loss involves the death of a child, for example, it is not relevant. It becomes a crucial component in the case of the death of a young married man with little children and a widow left behind. It is also part of the grief work when a husband with several wives dies, for example. And in these latter circumstances, the traditional culture encourages some kind of rehabilitation process for the widow and the children. A space is created within the grief work process for a family council meeting organized by members of the deceased family to attend to urgent family matters and on the agenda in that meeting, usually they discuss things like property settlement among the dead man's children, the continued education and training of the young father's children, the rehabilitation of the widow as well. So among the Luya people of Kenya, another important item on such an agenda is the settlement of debt claims before family council members disperse. So some people bring up claims that the deceased was indebted to them before he or she died, or vice versa. There are instances where the bereaved people themselves could bring up claims that certain extended family members or the community owed the deceased some amount of money or property or land or whatever the case may be. And one important practice is for the bereaved or some of the deceased relatives to offer to take some of the children along with them as they depart, or to take care of their education and training as their personal contribution to the full rehabilitation process in the deceased family, right? So this is a vital process in village communities where the option of government provided social security for the children is unavailable. So gestures like the above constitute the community's restoration strategy to enable the bereaved to repay some of the secondary losses caused by the death, right? Here, emphasis in many cases is on the bereaved's preoccupation with identity projects disrupted by the death. So housing, family car already ordered but not yet fully paid for, loans received in the deceased name, children's education, and so on. All these show that it is the prospective memory of the bereaved, their anxieties about how to face the future that is targeted for healing at this stage, with the outstanding matters arising from the death effectively addressed and settled, the main issues dominating the bereaved's prospective memory, such as what to do about the children, are now transcended. And the resolution of these outstanding concerns leads ultimately to a lasting, holistic relief in the bereaved's memory. And this reflects an elaborate community perspective that goes beyond the promotion of the bereaved's emotional or psychological adjustment. The intervention challenges us with the idea that a proper grieving process entails some mourning protocol compliance and ritual observance. The discussion shows that effective grief resolution is a holistic process that requires addressing practical concerns and specific aspects of the bereaved's memory. It is evident that cultural roots of the positive role that community plays in helping traumatized population and families to regain control of their lives. It also draws attention to the healing value of enabling traumatized communities to search for and conduct formal and symbolic reburial of their relatives who died in, for example, ethnic clashes or who were originally buried in mass graves in, let's say, the aftermath of war. They recommend that one goes through this process to help those traumatized communities to sort of go through all the processes that need to be done for them to heal. And so today we explored profound and intricate rituals surrounding grief and healing across African culture. These traditions, steeped in centuries of wisdom, show us how the process of mourning is not just about loss, but about restoration of individuals, families, and communities. We've seen how rituals of reclothing, rehabilitation, and reconciliation play a vital or a pivotal role in helping people regain their place in the social fabric, while preserving the dignity and legacy of the departed. And these stories remind us of the power of community in the face of tragedy. They highlight the ways culture provides not only solace, but also a framework for rebuilding after loss. Whether it's the symbolic act of letting go of mourning clothes or the communal support for widows and children, the journey of grief in a lot of African societies reflect resilience, unity, and hope. And as you reflect on what we've shared today, think about the rituals in your own life, right? Those that help you move forward, find closure, or reconnect with your community. What do they mean to you? How can we adapt these lessons of collective healing in our modern and often fragmented world? So if today's episode touched you, sparked new thoughts, or even raised questions, we would love to hear from you. Share your insights with us in the comment section. Let's continue the conversation and learn from one another. Don't forget to join us again for more stories and insights as we continue to explore Africa's crisis, histories, and possibilities for renewal. Join us next time on Izuka, where we'll delve into how Africa found herself where she is now. Until then, remember, renewal begins with reflection. Take care and thank you for listening.